What happens when truth meets power in a room full of scripted praise and selective morality? Welcome to another Malcolm Varon hearing, where we cut through the theater and expose the rot.
I want to submit for the record an op-ed by Ambassador Brink from Ukraine, the regional ambassador that was close until recently, 30 years of service of Democrat presidents and Republican ones. It's an op-ed that says Trump's Ukraine
Representative Vice is recognized.
choice, and she details how
So
peace
ordered.
at any cost is
Take
appeasement,
yes for an
not
answer.
peace.
So
Thank
ordered.
you, sir.
Representative Vice is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that the accomplishments of the Secretary of State in the first 100 days be placed in the record.
So ordered.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, good to see you again. We're holding up just some of those. You probably recognize what you've done for 100 days. It is absolutely amazing that you've done all of that. And as you said in your opening statement, it's our job in reauthorization to make many of them permanent. I share with you the fact that for decades, the division of USAID, sometimes in the embassy, sometimes out, coordinating sometimes, often not, populated by people who left state to go to aid but then weren't treated the same. All of that had to end, and I really appreciate your doing it, and I look forward to making that permanent. I want to just ask you a few questions, and some of them go to the previous questioner. Is Vladimir Putin the undeniable head of a country that has as many, basically, ability to bomb us into oblivion with nukes as any other country on Earth?
They have the largest, I believe, the largest strategic weapon stockpile in the world and one of the largest tactical nuclear weapon stockpiles.
And he's the undeniable leader.
Correct.
Is one of the things that every Secretary of State keeps in their mind that peace is never made with your friends, but rather with your enemies?
Well, it's one of the reasons why, irrespective of Ukraine, there has to be some level of communication between the United States and Moscow. It's frankly irresponsible to not have the two biggest nuclear powers on the planet communicating, which was the case for 3 years. That doesn't mean we're going to be allies or friendly unless conditions change, but we have to at least be able to communicate with them to prevent miscalculation and war.
And wasn't it true during the entire Cold War, president after president of both parties and secretary after secretary had to and did retain relations with the Soviet Union, up to and including President Reagan's famous negotiations that essentially led to the end of the Cold War?
If there had not been communications between the U.S. and Russia in 1961, the world could have ended during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Now, on that list behind me, there's a lot of taking and combining and so on. But I have two things I want to ask you about. One is, do you have a vision for OBO that would cause it to catch up and to reach a point where our embassies, consulates, and other facilities would never again lead to something like we've had at Benghazi and other occurrences where substandard facilities led to the loss of life?
Well, absolutely, it's our priority. In fact, every single day, we have a team that watches our mission posture around the world, not just because of the physical layout, but what the conditions are on the ground. Remember, in many of these posts, in many cases, we are very dependent on local forces and their ability to protect from the perimeter, what they're willing to offer. And so, as you recall, in Benghazi, one of the challenges we faced is we relied on local militias to provide perimeter security. When they abandoned their post, it left the consulate and vulnerable and ultimately led to loss of life. So as part of our analysis, clearly the physical layout and the protection, it's something we've watched very closely in places like Somalia, where we were lacking overhead protection in some cases, but also we are always looking at the capability and willingness of local liaison partners on the ground from the host government to provide their end of it. The less security they're able to provide us assurances on, the more nervous and concerned we become about our force posture or about our presence in any given country.
Now, Mr. Secretary, as you recall, during the first Trump administration, the President nominated me for the Trade Development Agency, and I kindly appreciate the fact that you were willing to support me if I'd ever gotten the actual vote. It is a small organization, a small part of our outreach to compete against Belt and Road. USAID could be part of that. Obviously, XM Bank, a host of other entities could be part of it. But in your opinion today, even with the changes you've made, Are we or are we not positioned to properly address, to provide complete packages to compete against Belt and Road?
Well, first of all, Belt and Road is largely a series of loans and other traps that are provided that you hire Chinese companies to come into your country and build a road or build a bridge or build a stadium or build whatever they want. That's actually not comparable to USAID, which is more humanitarian and development assistance, but it's in the form of a grant. That's more loaning on their part. I think the two entities that are best positioned to act as alternatives are the Development Finance Corporation, which is currently potentially could be expanded in my view, and then Millennium, which is undergoing a review for improvements. But I think both of these offer better alternatives in terms of comparison to or a way to compete against Belt and Road Initiative.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Yield back.
Chair now recognizes Representative Bera.
What we just witnessed was a pompous group pat on the back. Chairman Mast and Darrell Issa gush over the Secretary's 100-day miracle like it's the second coming of Reagan. But let's be clear, this is the same leadership that ghosted diplomatic norms, flirted with authoritarian strongmen, and left embassies vulnerable while preaching perimeter security. The Cold War Nostalgia Act? Cute, but you don't get points for stating the obvious. Yes, Putin has nukes, and yes, we need communication. What we don't need is revisionist applause for failed Trumpist diplomacy and paper-thin attempts to whitewash Benghazi-era negligence. From congratulatory groupthink to moral clarity, Representative Ami Bera steps up next, cutting through the smog of self-praise to talk about what actually saves lives. Now, watch this.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this Inspector General report about the impact of USAID Golden State. Mr. Secretary, I did not get the chance to know you while you were in the Senate, but like you did, I also have traveled a lot to Africa, have seen firsthand the gratitude of lives that we've saved. You know, after the Ebola crisis in 2014, had a chance to visit villages in Sierra Leone, and just the joy and thanks to the United States. You know, in 2015, you stated this, and again, foreign aid is less than 1% of our budget, but foreign aid can make a difference when properly used. And if you ever have a chance, travel to the African continent and you will meet people who are alive today because their American taxpayer-funded antiviral HIV medications that kept them alive. It will not be easy to radicalize people who are alive because the American taxpayer saved their lives and the lives of their children. Do you still stand by that statement?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's why we're still going to do foreign aid.
Great. So that's incredibly important. As a young doctor in the 1990s, I took care of a lot of people that were dying of HIV and AIDS. It is a painful death. What I hear on the ground in Africa is that these medications aren't getting to folks, that some of the folks that deliver the medications aren't getting to folks, and people are dying. We need to do what we did under President Bush with PEPFAR. We've saved over 25 million lives. Nearly 8 million babies are alive today because we prevented them from getting HIV/AIDS. I want to work with you to make sure we continue doing that. That is the goodness of the American people. I'm a little bit older than some of the people on this committee. I grew up looking at pictures of kids that were starving in the 80s. Part of the reason why I became a doctor, part of the reason why I'm on this committee, and why I've focused so much on health, nutrition, food aid, is because of pictures like that that are embedded in my mind as a kid. We came together as a country. Part of what moral clarity of the United States is we are a country of abundance. President Trump may not think this is in our national security interest, but I think it is in our faith interest. It is who we are as a spiritual nation, as a faith-based nation. We worry about that. We care about relieving starvation and so forth. We've got to do more, because I talk to the faith-based groups, I talk to our implementing partners, I read the news stories. I do not want to see more pictures like this coming out, and I'm definitely afraid in the next 30 days, 60 days, 2 years, 4 years, we're going to see more death and starvation because nobody else can do what we do as the United States of America. I'd like your commitment that you will work with us to make sure we continue providing food aid, that we continue doing what we do best based on our moral clarity. Can I have your commitment on that?
Yeah, in fact, that's why we're going to have a humanitarian fund within the Department of State that's going to provide the humanitarian system that you've outlined. And we're still going to be by far the largest donor in the world to
Great. And you'll
humanitarian
continue to
assistance.
work with this committee, work with us in a bipartisan way, in a bicameral way, to do what we do best. Nobody can do what the United States does.
Representative Bera delivers a gut punch of truth, reminding the room that foreign aid isn't charity, it's humanity. He confronts Trump's cold-blooded vision of national interest and replaces it with the soul of the American people. With decades of medical experience and moral conviction, Bera tells the GOP what they don't want to hear. Starving kids matter, even when there's no oil to steal. And while Republicans flex on nukes and flags, Bera talks about babies born HIV-free thanks to U.S. aid. That's real legacy, and it's being endangered by the very ideology currently occupying this committee. But if you thought that was moving, wait until you hear what Representative Madeleine Dean had to say. Her words cut past politics, straight into the soul of this crisis.
That's my hope, to be able to continue to work with you in that way. We want to see humanitarian aid. We're going to do more of it than anybody on the planet.
Great. Let's save lives. With that, let me yield the remainder of my time to my colleague from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
I thank you, Representative Bera, and God bless Jerry Connolly. Mr. Secretary, you and I had the great privilege this past Sunday of traveling to the installation of Pope Leo, where he encouraged us to choose love and help the world's poorest. He suggests that we should get proximate to the suffering. If I were to tell you, Mr. Secretary, that outside that door was a 3-year-old little girl starving, like that photograph, ribs protruding, weak, unable to speak, what would you do?
Whatever anybody would do, we would try to help her.
I agree. I would too.
And that's what we do more than anybody in the world.
Anybody would do that. We would go out that door and help that little child. It's your humanity that calls you to do that, to save a single life. Mr. Secretary, Gaza is starving. As of last week, the UN has confirmed, it's the UN, has confirmed at least 57 children have already died of malnutrition and 14,000 more are on the brink of starvation. Food sits just beyond the border for days, for weeks. It was cut off. Please hold the clock for me. Reclaiming my time. I understand they're upset. For days, for weeks, I asked that I could reclaim some of that time that was just interrupted.
We'll give you 5 seconds.
5?
Additional.
Innocent children are dying. Mr. Secretary, Pope Leo has called for an end to the blockade to humanitarian aid, which began by Mr. Netanyahu March the 2nd. He said, the Pope said, the price is being paid by children, the elderly, and the sick. Secretary Rubio, I call upon you and I ask for your affirmation of this. Stand by our faith, by the call of the Pope to save the children desperate for food and water, babies who have no way to feed themselves, mothers who have to watch them die. Stand by the Jewish faith. Their teaching tells us to save a single life is to save the whole universe. Will you commit to getting a surge of aid into Gaza now?
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Maybe the Secretary...
Chair now recognizes
maybe the
Representative
Secretary
Burchett
could
from
answer
Tennessee.
Mr.
This is what moral courage sounds like. Representative Dean, invoking the Pope and Jewish teachings alike, shames this administration's complicity in the Gaza blockade. Her metaphor of a starving 3-year-old girl just outside the door was devastating. Anyone would help her, she said, but we don't. We sit on aid. We watch children die while wagging geopolitical fingers. And when she asks for action, time runs out, literally and politically. This isn't diplomacy. It's state-sanctioned starvation, and it's cowardice, hiding behind procedural clocks and PR statements. The world is watching, and history won't forget who looked away. Let's get real. This wasn't a bipartisan discussion. It was a stark moral divide dressed in formal language and procedural theater. Republicans used their time to polish their own medals, relive Cold War fantasies, and divert attention from ongoing humanitarian failures. Meanwhile, Democrats Bera and Dean reminded us what governance should be about. Lives, not legacy. Food, not fireworks. Compassion, not contracts. If the GOP truly cared about American greatness, they'd stop abandoning global leadership in favor of transactional nationalism. Aid isn't weakness, it's strength with conscience. It's the soft power that once made America respected, not just feared. And let's talk about Gaza. The silence from Republicans isn't neutral, it's complicity. You don't get to claim faith values while letting babies starve behind barbed wire and bureaucracy. Either we lead with humanity or we surrender to cruelty disguised as strategy. The hearing laid it bare. One side wants applause, the other wants action. Only one deserves your support. If you believe compassion beats cruelty, subscribe to Malcolm Varon Hearing. Share this, call your representatives, and never stay silent when lives, real human lives, hang in the balance.